We're going to talk about non-apparent disabilities today. Um, I want to start off by acknowledging that when I first created this presentation, it used to be called Now You See It, Now You Don't, Invisible Disabilities. And I'm not using that word anymore, right? We're using a different language because when we know better, we can do better. So I changed the title to be non-apparent disabilities instead of using the word invisible or hidden, because the words invisible or hidden when discussing disabilities has some negative connotation. It also has some connotation that people who have non-apparent disabilities are intentionally trying to hide things from other people. The idea of being an invisible disability also has connotations that this disability is not as valid, or it's not enough. It doesn't prove enough that they're disabled enough. So I no longer use the word invisible disabilities or hidden disabilities, instead changing my language to say non-apparent disabilities, because the disability community prefers it. And right, language changes all the time. When we know better, we can do better. So I just want to acknowledge this. And like, as we're moving forward through the presentation, it's just something that we'll continue to talk about. So speaking of language and like language mattering, when we are discussing disabilities, particularly people with disabilities, there are different ways that you can talk about these people, right? There's person first language, saying a person with disability. There's identity first person language, which is saying a disabled person. People in the disability community sometimes prefer one or the other. Some people prefer saying that they're a disabled person because they can't separate the disability from themselves. And I just want to like briefly share like what should you do, as a professional who is working with students, working with all sorts of different people. It's always good to ask, right? It's always good to have a conversation with a person and like ask what they prefer if they identify as disabled, and then use what they prefer, right? Similar to like names, pronouns, talk to the person and figure out their preference. As someone who is still coming to terms with being disabled, I will be using this interchangeably throughout my presentation. So just something to know about. Moving forward, just a disclaimer before we jump into the rest of the content. So I'm a professional of my own experiences, right? I'm not the speaker for every single person in higher education who has a non-apparent disability or identifies as disabled. So a lot of this presentation is going to be my own personal experiences. And I don't want to speak on behalf of every single person that is disabled. And then also just a little heads up, right? This conversation today is hopefully going to make you feel uncomfortable. That's my goal. I really want you to embrace that discomfort. I want you to sit in it, reflect on your past experiences, because together we can do better when we know better. And then also, right, take this time to take care of yourself as you need. So we're going to start by doing an activity together. So if you have something nearby to like write down on, that'd be great. I'll be having you do a lot of reflection throughout this presentation. Otherwise, I would love for you to use the chat. But our activity today is going to be called Judge a Book by Its Cover. So you are going to write down your assumptions/judgments of the person in the following photos based solely on your observations, right? So we are actually going to be making assumptions and judgments of this person. Feel free to share it in the chat. All right, so please go ahead and make some assumptions about the person in these images, the one person that is the common person throughout. So just to give a more vocal description of these images, there is one woman who is similar between all of these photos. She has brown hair, appears to be white, holding different things, different food items. There's a scene where she's holding something that appears to be ice cream, tamales. There's a picture in a hammock, and then a picture in a purple dress. So go ahead, write down your assumptions, and then go ahead and when you're ready, feel free to throw them in the chat. Remember, just assumptions that you can see visually from the photos or the description I gave. If it was not clear, this person is me. I'll say that. Seeing in the chat, I'm going to read a few of them. Appears to be happy, friends, active, likes beer, social, mainstream, likes to have a good time, positive, foodie, enjoys food and people, in a heterosexual relationship. Yep, looks to be crying in one photo, enjoys the outdoors, able-bodied, regular. Yeah, great. You can keep throwing them in the chat, but I'm gonna bump over to some of the assumptions that I wrote down, right? Here were some of my assumptions, right? Of these, this main person in the photos, white, she's white, a woman, appears to be a woman, happy usually, right? You clocked the one photo of the crying in the upper corner, likes to be outside, likes the color purple, and then a Midwesterner, right? I don't know if you saw it, but there was like the UMR logo in the back. And then there was also a image of Ames, which I'll show you in a second. So these are some of the things, right, that you may not have seen in those photos. So my non-apparent disabilities, I have celiac, which is an autoimmune disease where I cannot process gluten. So I can't eat any gluten or else I am in a lot of physical pain. I have anxiety and I have undiagnosed ADHD as well. So in these photos, right, you may have noticed different things, but you didn't see all of my non-apparent disabilities. Over here in this image, I'll share that like this is actually cider, and you might notice that like my brat doesn't actually have a bun on it compared to my partner's who does have a bun. In every single one of these images, my disabilities and non-apparent disabilities are actually very present. This ice cream is gluten-free from a really gluten-free spot. And then you can tell right over here, maybe some anxiety from a situation with an exam that didn't actually go through. Maybe a little bit of ADHD with time management planning as well. So those are some things that you were able to maybe gather from the images that you just saw. Thanks for participating so far. So we're going to jump into a definition, right? What are non-apparent disabilities, right? They are non-apparent to the eye, primarily neurological. They capture a large spectrum of non-apparent disabilities and challenges. And some of examples of non-apparent disabilities are chronic pain, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, ADHD, allergies, asthma, autism, celiac, etc. Right? Not a full list. These are just a few examples that I came up with. So those photos that you saw, right, don't show the whole person. Just as we defined, right, the photos shown are actually quote unquote hiding an identity from other people. You were not able to tell just based off those images that I have celiac or I have anxiety or I have ADHD. You might have been able to tell, oh, well, she's not eating a bun in one of those photos, but it doesn't actually share what my actual ability status is, right? If you pay attention, though, you might hear me asking, is X or Y gluten free? Or you might see me getting food first, or notice that I'm not really paying attention to something or disassociating. And what are some assumptions like you could make if you only heard or saw those things? And this is again another participation in the chat. But yeah, if you only saw those photos or you only heard me asking or noticed me not paying attention, what are some things that you might assume about me? Just waiting for the chat. I want to throw something in. Yeah, disinterested is one. Overwhelmed might be another. Yeah. Picky, particular. Um, yeah, maybe I'm trying to eat healthy. Yeah. Another one that comes to mind is selfish. She's selfish. Why is she getting food first? Um, she's rude. She doesn't care. Yeah, maybe anxious. Maybe you do assume that I'm anxious. Great. Difficult, in a hurry. Those are great. Yeah, yeah. Great. Okay, we'll move on. So yeah, those are some assumptions that you might be able to make about me. Obviously, now you know that I have disabilities. But based off of maybe your first perception of me, that would not be the case. So assumptions lead to ableism, right? That's why we're talking about it. That's why we did this activity about judging a book by a cover. Assumptions do lead to ableism, especially assumptions that people need to have a visible disability to be qualified as disabled is ableism. So a definition of ableism is right a discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities. It defines people as less than because of their ability status. Our society is inherently ableist, right? Because it's not built or made for individuals with disabilities of any kind, right? So ableism is ingrained in all of us in all of the things that we are doing. Um, Oftentimes, people with non-apparent disabilities feel like they have to prove that they have a disability in order to be seen as enough or disabled enough, which we will talk about in a later slide. So I'm going to give some examples of ableism on campus in residence halls. So we talked about, right, systematic ableism is present in all of us and in all situations. It's where like the built environment is not created for individuals with disabilities. So some examples of ableism specifically related, right, to non-apparent disabilities in the residence halls here. One of them examples that I see very often in tower style buildings is only certain people can take the elevator, right? If you're on the first floor, you're on the second floor, the third floor, you better be taking those stairs. I don't know why you need to use an elevator. We've even had people who are carrying a lot of packages being told, why are you using the elevator when you're only going up one floor, even though their arms are full of packages, right? That's an example of somebody maybe benefiting from an elevator, something used as a mobility accessibility resource, benefiting from it, right? Lack of access to mobility needs. Maybe there's a building on your campus that is full of stairs. To be very honest, my building is almost solely stairs. So individuals who have maybe get in a non-apparent disability or an apparent disability throughout the year, they struggle to get through the building, or maybe they notice a lot more that it's harder to get through the building because of all the stairs. Another example is a lack of food that meets all dietary restrictions, right? Gluten-free food, halal, kosher, vegan, vegetarian food, dairy-free, etc. And then another example of ableism around campus is requiring documentation and diagnosis for learning accommodations. This one is right a challenge for us as professionals of an institution because right we like to have things documented. And oftentimes like we need documentation to be able to take action, and documentation can be a really, really hard process for a lot of people. And it might be an expensive process, right? It might take a lot more time. For people with ADHD, maybe they don't think about it very often. Maybe they struggle to like manage their time and actually get appointments, right, scheduled. So that requiring of documentation and diagnosis for accommodations just in general can be a barrier and a challenge for people with non-apparent disabilities. Yeah. So we're going to do another activity. This is one that I just want you to write down. You do not have to share it in the chat. I'm going to give just a couple minutes for you to like self-reflect. But I want you to think about the following questions and then write a response down, right? Or internally answer them in your own spaces. So my first question, when have you perpetuated ableism? My second question, when have you noticed others perpetuating ableism? And then my third question is, what is something that you can do when you notice ableist behaviors or systems? So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes, right, to write your responses down or just reflect on them internally. And then we will move on from there. Okay, thank you for sitting with that, sitting in silence. I'm not going to ask any of you to share unless you would like to in the chat. But I do want to acknowledge, right, these are hard questions to ask yourself because you're really confronting, right, your internalized ableism, your internalized practices. I'll share, right, even as a person who has a disability, right, I still perpetuate ableism because of the way that it is ingrained in our systems and our institutions. The first time that I gave this presentation, I gave it to some student staff and I didn't have a microphone. And that is, perpetuating ableism because some students who maybe have a hearing disability or are hearing impaired might not have been able to hear me. The other the next time that I gave this presentation, I didn't have closed captions on because it was in person and just I just didn't even think of having closed captions. And again, that's another situation where like that could have been something that I had done to help, combat ableism in spaces that I just hadn't thought about. And it was a way that I perpetuated ableism. So, right, people with disabilities can still perpetuate ableism. I just want to say that and acknowledge that. Um, and that like we all need to be working together to confront our own internalized ableism in order to be able to work towards dismantling ableism. So thank you again for taking that time and sitting in silence. Like I said, this whole presentation is about sitting in discomfort, and I know that's not normal with presentations. So thank you. Move on. Um, I want to say, right, don't get it confused, don't get it twisted. I think having a non-apparent disability can absolutely be a privilege, right? I am able to pass as an able-bodied person. From the photos that you saw, like you would not have been able to tell that I have a disability because of my outward appearance. I also get the opportunity to choose when I get to disclose. So like I am choosing to disclose to all of you that I have a disability, but I don't have to do that in every single space that I'm in, right? And that is a protection for me as someone who gets to choose when to disclose, right? That's where, for me, ableism doesn't always affect my life because I get to choose when I disclose and when I get that oppression put on me. I'm also, right, a lot less likely to face discrimination because people aren't able to tell visually that I have a disability. So with all that said, right, a non-apparent disability can be a privilege, but also it's isolating and can be dangerous, right? We're seen as not disabled enough, right? Oh, well, you don't seem disabled. I don't really know if you need that accommodation, right? Do you really need it? Because you have to put on this performance of having a disability. And if other people around you don't see that performance of disability as, acceptable or enough, you might not get the accommodations that you need as someone with a non-apparent disability, right? Some people might be asked to prove that they're disabled, right? Rather than just accepting it as it is. If you share that you have a disability and you need a different accommodation, you might be required to prove that you're disabled. And that gets into a really dangerous situation, right? Bullied, people can be bullied for having a non-apparent disability, right? Especially with neurodivergence, people just don't understand how different brains work if it's not their experience, and bullying is very common. And then also people with non-apparent disabilities can put themselves into dangerous situations to fit in, right? So for example, for someone who maybe has chronic pain, maybe they're choosing to sit down on the bus one day because they're having a chronic pain flare up. But maybe the bus is super, super packed, right? And maybe somebody else with a more apparent disability walks onto the bus and someone else asks them, why aren't you getting up? Why can't you move? And it's very dangerous for someone who has a non-apparent disability to try to fit into a situation when they know other people around them, society around them, is making assumptions about them and judging them for that. And I'm going to talk about my own personal experience here in just a moment of a dangerous situation that I felt like I was put in order to fit in. So great. So this is my vulnerability moment. We're going to talk about it. So I was diagnosed, I'll say it, I was diagnosed with celiac back in May of 2023. So pretty recent to me. And I attended the UMR Kauai 2023 meeting. Very often we have buffets and luncheons. And for me, buffets can be pretty uncomfortable, pretty unsafe as someone who has celiac, right? So again, celiac is an autoimmune disease where I can't have any gluten. Even small trace amounts of gluten are really harmful for my digestive system. So buffets are like my worst nightmare. And during this situation, we were sitting down and we were dismissed by table, right? So rather than like asking people who have any accommodations or any dietary restrictions, like, hey, if you want to get up now to go get your food, you can go first. We were dismissed by table. As someone who has celiac, and I know that cross-contamination is way more likely with buffets, I decided to go get my food first, right? Like I was like, you know what, I'm not going to wait to have all this cross-contamination, all these other people go before me, because I just know that that's going to be really unsafe for me with the possibility of cross-contamination. So I went ahead, I went up and I got my food. And I came back to sit down at my table. Technically my table wasn't dismissed, but I went ahead and made that decision for myself to go and get food. And after I sat down, the table next to us was making comments about me. Why did she go get her food first? Why? That's so selfish. They were staring at me. Overall, just being quite rude. And it was a pretty terrible experience for me. I'm not gonna lie. Like for me having to already put myself out there, especially after a recent diagnosis, to go get food, put myself first, make sure that I wasn't in a dangerous situation, and then to have that response didn't feel good, right? I left the room and went to the bathroom and cried because it was such a terrible experience. And it was very hard for me. And it was just one example of a way that, like, for me to be safe and feel safe, I had put myself into this situation. So this is kind of my why, right, for this presentation. This presentation did not exist prior to this vulnerability moment. But I also want to acknowledge that white supremacy and privilege showed up for me in that moment, right? So as a white woman in a primarily white area, right, UMR, which is the Midwest region, is very white. White supremacy was present, and I was just uncomfortable in that situation. I was never unsafe. If I had different identities, I think that could have gone a much different way, and it might have been even more dangerous and unsafe for me. So I just want to acknowledge that, like, as a white woman with my privileges, I was able to be in this space and continue to come into this space and feel comfortable enough to share and be critical and have conversations about it because of my privilege, because of white supremacy culture, that I know that, like, should I have had different identities, this would not be possible. And this presentation probably would not have won a best of showcase, right? Because of the criticalness um, of the presentation itself, of the UMR Akuhoai region. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and state that for this presentation because I think it is important and I think it's relevant, right? That intersectionality piece really, really matters. And it's something for you to think about as you're working with different students and also as we're moving forward with our other activities of how intersectionality is at play at your own institutions. So again, right, this is why this matters to me, right? This is my life, this is my truth and my experience, right? I'm also not alone, right? Like while I'm somebody who's being a lot more vocal about my experience with non-apparent disabilities, there's no possible way that I am the only person who has ever had an experience with their non-apparent disability in a space where they feel like they should be seen and they should feel safe. But again, I'm speaking out about it because of my identities and the privilege that I have, and I know that I'm able to speak out about it. You might have someone on your staff, maybe it's a peer, maybe a student, maybe a supervisor who chooses not to disclose because of the danger that they may be in, not just because of their ability status, but because of all of their intersecting identities. They may choose to isolate instead. That's something to be aware of. And that's also something to respect, right, as their own decision and what they need to do for their own safety. Why should this matter to you, right? I'm talking a lot about me, a lot about my personal experiences. Why should this matter to you? You all will interact with people throughout your entire lives, right? You have residents, you have peers, you have supervisors. They're just one example of the interactions that you will have. So by learning about non-apparent disabilities and working towards destructuring ableism, you can help, right, destigmatize various accommodations, create more inclusive spaces, decrease discrimination, educate others, and then also combat systemic ableism. And I just want to set a reminder that a person's ability status could change at any point, right? This means that someone could do something one day and then they're not able to do it the next day, right? An example would be maybe they're able to take the stairs one day and the next day they need an elevator. Maybe they're able to eat a certain food one day. Maybe they need a dietary restriction the next or a dietary accommodation the next, right? Personally, for me, one day I could eat gluten, and then May 2023, I could not eat gluten. So that is just the nature of ability status. It could be changing. A person also might have a temporary disability, right? And then one day they might not be able to do something. The next day they might be able to do something. So just something to keep in mind. I also want to read this quote that if we live long enough, we will all experience some form of disability. This was written by Rebecca Tausig in the book Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body. And it's very true, right? It's very true to my own life. One day I was not disabled. The next day I was disabled. And as we all grow and age, like this quote will be impactful. And this is why this also needs to matter, right? Because someday you could have various abilities that you may need accommodations for. And because of the systematic ableism in place, it's going to be a lot harder to get the accommodations that you need, which is why we need to do this work and this action now. So here are some of my ideas of what you can do to be more inclusive. Mind your business, respectfully, right? Mind your business. You don't need to know what's going on in everybody else's lives. You don't need to know why someone chose to go get food early, to relate it back to my personal example, right? Let people with dietary restrictions eat first at events and order food for all dietary restrictions. Even if you don't think the people in your floor, in your building have any, just having the food there is helpful because people who don't have a dietary need can still eat it, right? Give grace to strangers and your friends. Call out ableism, right? In yourself and in others as you see it, as you experience it. And then I would love for all of you, right, take some time to reflect and then share some other ideas about what you can do to be more inclusive. Feel free to type them in the chat. I don't think you can unmute, but feel free to type them in the chat. And I'll read them off as they come in. You can also feel free to just write them down, keep them close if you don't want to share them. Yeah. One example shared was use this knowledge as a lens as creating new protocol and policies. Absolutely. Yeah, in Simon's world, have to check self when people have unique requests slash reasons for why they want a room change. Yeah, that's real, real. Checking yourself, listening to requests, try not to judge. Don't center all events around food, right? Review policies, protocols. Ask questions with curiosity, not judgment or assumptions. Sure. Yeah. Be mindful that someone might be on their phone because of a medical device connected to that phone. Absolutely. Remember, student staff may need accommodation supports too, giving them breaks during trainings, especially, right? Understanding the need for fidgets or getting up, moving around, adapting language. Yeah. Okay. Great. Another one that came in, educate ourselves and our staffs or others in our group further about this very topic or about a specific disability that you don't know much about. Absolutely. Feel free to keep sharing. I am going to move on to our next one. So I'm going to be giving a couple case studies as well. Right, this presentation was originally created for in-person conversations. Um, so this might be a little bit more difficult, but I would love for, again, more chat participation. So we're going to be doing two case studies to talk about how we are interacting with people who have disabilities or even with the system of ableism itself. So first case study, right, working with campus partners. So you are at an end of the year banquet, recognizing the hard work of you and your peers across your division of housing. The conference services team, if you have a conference services team, planned the entire event and catered with the dining hall team. They start by letting the senior leadership members get food first and dismissing table by table after that. You notice your coworker does not get any food, and you remember that they have multiple dietary restrictions that the banquet food does not accommodate to. So, what are some action items that you can take in the moment to support your coworker? What conversation can you have with your campus partners to make banquets more inclusive? And again, if you work at a small institution, maybe think about how this might apply in a different space, right? Maybe it's not in your division of housing, but maybe it's a different space with a different campus partner. And then what other steps could be taken to make this event more inclusive for all? So again, I would love some chat participation. I know it's a biggie one. Take a moment to reflect and then feel free to share. So just a couple of responses coming in that I'll share. One was ask for dietary restrictions slash needs before the event. Other steps could be including a survey in the RSVP for allergies or restrictions, work with catering for specific meals, move away from buffet style, planning for accommodations ahead of time, food related, mobility related, closed captions, etc. Ask a dining or catering person if they can accommodate a dietary need, and if so, have them talk with that person away from the group, find out what they can bring for that specific person with a dietary need. Inform upper administration or supervisors during the dinner to see if something can be offered while the meal is going on. Absolutely. In the moment, ask coworker what they might need, and then work to see if anything can be done to get food that meets those needs and follow up with the catering dining staff. Wouldn't want to assume anything directly, right? Ask them directly if that coworker needs anything. Yep, ask what you can do to help the coworker, offer different options, advocacy, listening, ordering food in. I love that option, right? Sometimes they might just need a rant, right? Prepackaged options, allergen-friendly options, survey for the feedback after the event. Yeah, awesome. Love this. Thank you all for participating. We have one more case study, but yeah, these are all wonderful ways of supporting the coworker and taking different steps to make sure that this event is more inclusive. Our second case study is elevator conflict, right? So you are getting on an elevator with one of your student staff members or a team member, right? You're joined by several other students who immediately note that you all are going up just one floor in the elevator. The students immediately begin talking to one another and complaining that only people who live on the upper floors get to use the elevator. It's an unspoken rule. You know that the student staff member or team member with you was having a flare up of chronic pain and needed to use the elevator to make it to their meeting. What are some action items that you can take away in the moment to support the person you are with? Sorry, that you can take in the moment, right? Some action items that you can take in the moment to support the person you're with. What conversation can you have with those students in the moment, if at all? What other steps could be taken to support all people who need to use the elevator or just want to use the elevator? Again, this is a moment where I would love chat participation. I'll go ahead and read them off for everyone as they come in. Or again, just reflect internally about what's going on. Yeah. Thanks, Brooks. Yeah, it took the words out of my mouth. In the moment, tell others to mind their business respectfully. Yeah, mind their business. Mm-hmm. Maybe another question too is, as professionals, what are some steps that you could take to educate, right, students living in your buildings? Another chat item just came in. I had issues when I was a student and my RA did some programming, and then there was some signage about accessibility added as well. Yep, post some inclusive signage. Love that. Absolutely amazing. Yeah, you can tell people, right? Not all disabilities are visual. Some are invisible or not apparent. Some people have different needs. Another chat said, I always had my RAs talk about the elevator being for everyone in their floor meetings at the start of the year. Love that. Absolutely love that. Passive education inside the elevator. Yeah, by the elevator buttons, perhaps. Super. Okay. Amazing. You can keep sending the information or the ideas that you have in the chat, but I will move on to our next slide. So I just want you to take a self-reflection, right? And again, if you want to add this into the chat, you are more than welcome to, but at least self-reflect, right? How did it feel to respond to these case studies? Was it easy? Was it hard? I want to state that not all situations will be black and white or have a clear answer. And I'm naming this because various different reasons, right? A lot of different things may play into how you are able to respond. Campus politics is one, right? With those campus partners, right? You might be really needing to be careful about what you're saying to your campus partners. And campus politics might influence how you respond in that situation to someone not getting their needs met with their dietary needs. Your supervisor support might differ. Maybe there's something that you really want to do or a conversation you really want to have with your student staff, with students in your building, but you're not getting the supervisor support that you need. Maybe the student wants or needs different things. Maybe they don't want you to say anything because they feel they'll be targeted more. Or maybe they want something that is completely unreasonable and you're not able to help them with that need, right? Maybe you don't have a clear answer because that would include outing someone of having a non-apparent disability, right? So I think that the case studies that I tried to bring to the table were some that we could really have a good conversation about. And right, there are some steps that you could probably figure out to do. And not everything is going to be that easy, right? Not everything is going to have a very clear answer, and you might have to work in the nuance. You might have to get comfortable with working in the nuance, or get comfortable in finding a loophole or finding a different unique situation or a unique solution that's never been done before, right? So here are some of my ideas again about what you can do to combat ableism immediately, right, in your halls. So some ideas: have foods that meet all dietary restrictions on hand at all times, right? Maybe that is some cookies, maybe that's some granola bars, maybe that's some chips that you have just in your office, in your nearby for your house fellows or your RAs to just grab and pass out at an event for a student who might have a dietary need. Or ask your team to always order food that will meet the dietary restrictions of their residents. My students, my house fellows, they will send out a form at the beginning of the year to figure out which residents on their floor have different needs and how they can support those needs. Maybe you have fidget toys in your office for meetings, or maybe you have them at events or trainings. Encourage your staff to not always have events at night. Some students have various different needs, and maybe the evening time is not their time to go and socialize. Maybe they don't have any energy at all. Maybe they're having a pain flare up, and having an event at a night is really impacting their ability to go and meet people and create community. Request microphones or closed captions for all meetings or presentations. Hold events in spaces where bathrooms are close by, and those spaces have enough room for people to navigate, right? Maybe have a virtual meeting or event option. And then ask residents for feedback and listen, right? Don't just take the feedback and be like, oh, yeah, that's great. That's good food. That's good food for thought. Actually listen, take it, and try to apply it to future events, future programs, future meetings to support those students. You might be doing all of these things already, and you might not be. And that's okay, right? That's why we're having this conversation. That's why this presentation exists. So for my final reflection, I want to ask, what is one actionable thing that you are going to take from this presentation to implement, or what is one thing you're already doing and you want to do it better, right? Please share this in the chat. I think it's really good to have a lot of different voices, a lot of different thoughts about this, because it is really good to sit in collaboration with people who have different experiences and have different perspectives based on the students that they're working with. So would love to hear your answers in the chat. Again, I don't think you can unmute, but would love to hear your answers in the chat. Yeah, I'm seeing, right, like, don't make assumptions, change your language to say non-apparent disabilities, share conversation with staff. One institution is good about having microphones, but maybe adding on closed captioning at presentations. Yeah, praise residents for advocating for themselves, even if it's uncomfortable. Would like to create a checklist of all the things we can do to make events inclusive, share it with the department so everyone can be more mindful. Being a more vocal advocate when ableism occurs. You can use the raise hand function, and then Alyssa can unmute you if you want to share. Thanks, Alyssa. And then consider universal design approaches for policies, programs, etc. Another one is adding closed captioning, signage for bathroom locations would be good things to implement.